want to put water on, it's cooling the battery pack.
Yeah, right.
I didn't know any of that stuff.
Yeah, it's bad.
Okay, it's 4 o'clock, Tuesday, October 3rd, and we'll call this meeting of the Salina Planning Commission to order. Kai, did we meet the posting requirements of the Kansas Open Meeting Record Act?
I can confirm that the packet was posted and the required notice of the meeting was provided.
Thank you. Dean, roll call.
I'll call roll now. Commissioner Sydow.
Here.
Commissioner Vancouver.
Here.
Commissioner Alt. Commissioner Farber.
Here.
Commissioner Ivy.
Here.
Commissioner Waters.
Here.
Chair Mikeson.
Here.
So that gives us 6 in attendance. We have 7 current members, and so we have a quorum and have met our Open Meetings Act requirements, so we can proceed with today's agenda.
Okay. Item 2.1, I presume you have had a chance to read the minutes, and if there's any corrections to the minutes, we'll entertain those now and also entertain a motion to approve the minutes if there's no corrections.
I move we approve the minutes.
I second.
Been moved and seconded to approve the minutes of the September 19th, 2023 meeting. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None being heard, motion carries. Dean, new business.
We have one new application, which is a public hearing because it involves a rezoning request, and that is a rezoning application number Z23-8, and filed by Karen.
You know, Mike.
Been filed by Karen Couch on behalf of the Salina Food Bank, and it's requesting a change in zoning district classification from R2 multifamily residential to C3 shopping center district. And the purpose of the rezoning request is to allow construction of a parking lot expansion for the food bank. And so Mr. Hers has the area that's requested for rezoning up on the screen. For those who are not familiar, the food bank is located directly north of the Ace Hardware complex at the corner of Chicago and Spruce Street. So Mr. Hers is going to present the report today, so I'm going to turn it over to him.
Thank you, Mr. Andrew and Commission. The Salina Food Bank property was originally developed in 2001, and it is part of the Holiday Addition, which is platted in 1958. So the property was platted in 1958 and remained vacant until 2001, when the St. John's Missionary Baptist Church project came into fruition and the church was constructed, and the Salina Emergency Aid Food Bank also came into development. And that was done through a CDBG grant that was issued to Salina in an awardance of $324,000. That happened in 1999, and the food bank raised approximately a little over $141,000 through private donations to bring the project forward, and construction began. So the construction began in March of 2001 and was completed on October 11th, 2001, and has been in operation ever since then. The applicant is requesting to rezone the property on Lot 9, which is the piece of the property that is not zoned C3. It's the brown area shown on the zoning map here. And here's what the lot actually looks like in terms of the Holiday Edition plat. So their holdings are 1, 2, 3, 7, and 9 of Block 6 in the Holiday Edition. 1, 2, 3, and 7 are all currently zoned C3 shopping center commercial. However, Lot 9 has remained R2, and as such is not able to be paved with an accessory parking lot. And that brings us to where we are today. That brings us forward to our current story. The applicant, which is the food bank, approached city staff about constructing a parking lot that would be accessory to their operations on Lot 9, which is currently, for the most part, vacant land that has grass and a few trees. The site plan that they proposed would utilize the existing alley, and it would pave the alley so that parking could be brought in off of Spruce Street, and people could park along the fence of their garden that they have, and there'd be a sidewalk that would come down and connect to a public sidewalk that they are working with Public Works to construct that would take people into the building, into the food bank operations. When the applicant spoke with city staff about this, it was identified that because the property is currently zoned R2 and doesn't match the existing zoning of the rest of the zoning lot, the C3 district, they could not construct an accessory parking lot. And the options that we gave them, at least the recommendation that we gave them, was to rezone the property or request rezoning for the property from R2 to C3 so that it would match the rest of the campus that they have there. And so that was what the applicant brought forward. They submitted an application to rezone the property from R2 to C3. We did our necessary public notifications with our journal notice as well as our property owner letters. And in preparation for the staff report, we did identify that because the property is part of the community center future land use area, which I'll pull up on our zoning map. Let's see if I can get transparency on so you can kind of see underneath it too. Well, apparently, this particular section has been updated from the map we are looking at, but this whole area is a community center area that is a land use category that was designed as a mixed use center where you would have retail, you would have services, you would have residential units all kind of mixed together in a commercial node. It would have a larger capacity. It would be like the neighborhood center that we have at various commercial intersections, but it would be on a more community-wide scale versus a neighborhood scale. And so with that in mind, what we have suggested in our report is that the request be changed from C3 to Plan C3. And that is to meet that requirement that all commercial properties within the commercial community center future land use area have a planned development to them. This also requires a two-stage process where you look at the rezoning of the property for the zoning map amendment and also a future plan, a site plan that would be reviewed by this board as well. And so this will be a two-action request that you would have. One would be the rezoning to a PC3 district. The second would be a review of the site plan that's been proposed. So the intent and purpose of the C3 shopping center district, it is designed to provide a district of no less than 1 acre for a relatively broad range of retail shopping facilities, which primarily consist of specialty shops and stores. Uses would be offices, retail stores, grocery stores, restaurants, convenience stores, etc. The lot 9, which is the zoning request area, when combined with the rest of the Salina Food Bank's property and the surrounding area, would meet all of the land use requirements, including off-street parking. The off-street parking that was originally permitted as part of the 2001 plan required 20 off-street parking spaces, which the original plan provided. In 2020, 3 additional off-street parking spaces were added that brought the total number of off-street parking spaces to 23, and the proposed site plan that is being proposed with this application would have 14 additional off-street parking spaces along the east end off of the alleyway. So that takes us to our rezoning criteria, the first of which is the suitability of the site for development, and that deals with the suitability of the property for development under the existing R2 zoning and the limitations of the R2 zoning district and whether or not the R2 zoning that is currently there inhibits the redevelopment of the property. This property has been vacant since it was platted in 1958, and the applicant believes that the current R2 zoning inhibits their ability to use the property as part of their food bank operations because they don't have housing, and R2 is designed for housing. It doesn't allow them to really utilize that piece of their property or that piece of their campus. And so they're proposing to rezone the property to a C3 or PC3 in order to match the rest of the campus zoning and make it more conducive to their uses. Character of the neighborhood, this deals with whether or not the requested PC3 zoning would be compatible with the current and existing zoning in the area. If we were to look at the surrounding zoning, you would see that the properties to the north are C3, the property to the south, which is the Ace Hardware property, is C3, and the properties that are adjacent to Broadway Boulevard to the west are zone C5. So 3 of the 4 directions surrounding them are all commercial, with the north and south being C3. There is R2 zoning to the east. However, the applicant argues and staff agrees that rezoning the Lot 9 piece of their property would not encroach into the R2 zoning and the residential neighborhoods to the east because you do have an alleyway that's existing. And by rezoning the R2 piece to C3 or PC3, you would be matching the east end of the Ace Hardware property zoning, C3 zoning, which would be compatible with the character of the neighborhood. It would also put the residential piece of the R2 piece of their campus property into a more conducive use for how their operations operate. Looking at the site utilities, the property does have access and is currently supported by both city water and sanitary sewer, as well as a functioning drainage system. So there is a sewer line that comes up through an easement just to the east of their building. This easement is part of the platted easement that went all the way up through Block 6, and when St. John's Missionary Baptist Church originally developed, they actually vacated those easements in order for them to construct their church over the top of where that easement was, and that sewer line was relocated over to the west end of the property. The food bank also looked at being part of that petition to vacate that utility easement. However, they were not able to follow through with that petition because they didn't have the adequate funding to move and relocate the sanitary sewer line. It was going to be over $30,000, and at the time the project didn't have that in its budget. So that sewer line and that sewer easement is still existing. So there's access to water, there's access to sanitary sewer, there's drainage inlets at the corner that take in stormwater and move it from the site. Traffic and access, there is access on both Chicago Street as well as Spruce Street, and that is where the applicant is proposing to have the new parking lot accessed off of. It would be Spruce Street. And staff does not believe that rezoning the property to C3 or PC3 and adding an accessory parking lot would have any negative impacts on the traffic and access in this neighborhood. In fact, we believe it might reduce some of the congestion that you find on a daily basis. You can see even in this aerial photo, and I don't know what time of day it was taken, but there are a number of cars parked in the street. But when you come, and I've been there when they've had operations, and it is to say it's a zoo is probably an understatement. It's amazing that they operate as efficiently as they do, because they are an operation in severe need within our community. Conformance with the comprehensive plan. The plan that staff referenced did have this particular property being future community center, which has primary uses as semi-public, office spaces, and service type of operations as primary uses. So the existing food bank and their operations would fit well within those uses that are associated with that future land use area. And the C3 district is a zoning district that is listed as one of the zoning districts most appropriate for the community center future land use area. Site development plan review. So this would be kind of the second piece of your review, where I'll go through this really quickly, and then we can have any questions and deliberation, and you can take the two actions separately. So this is where we would look at and review the site plan that's being proposed. In this case, we have 14 off-street parking spaces. They would all be paved. They would all meet the dimensional requirements. The driving aisle requirement is 24 feet, which would be met with this proposed plan. It would have this, the food bank already has and exceeds the appropriate number of ADA parking stalls and spaces, but they are adding an additional parking space next to the garden area, so that people that are attending the garden area, not necessarily going inside the building, can park here in close proximity to the garden. So that will be a voluntary ADA parking space that would be above and beyond what is required. The driveway width requirements are being met with a 24-foot driveway. The proposed accessory parking is on the property, the principal zoning lot of the food bank, so it meets that requirement. There are two requirements that staff will continue to work with the food bank on that will require adjustments to the proposed plan. One is there is a requirement that there be a 5-foot buffer between the property line and the off-street parking spaces, and the purpose of that 5-foot buffer is to have landscape screening. So this buffer here is like 4 feet, so it's really close, but it's not quite 5. That'll have to be widened to meet a 5-foot dimension, and screening in terms of shrubs would have to be added in a landscape planting plan, showing the shrubs that would be added would need to be submitted for staff to review. So those would be the only items associated with the site plan that staff would need to continue to work with the applicant on. However, the main pieces, all of the dimensions, seem to work and meet all of the requirements. So as I mentioned earlier, this is going to be a two-step process, where the first piece is a review of the rezoning request. It is public, quasi-public. So it doesn't necessarily have to be PC3. Okay. So Mr. Andrew, while I was doing my presentation, did confirm that the future land use map shows this particular property being part of a public, quasi-public land use category, which doesn't have the plan development requirement that the community center requirement does have. So evidently we updated that, and I was unaware of that, but that's good news for the applicant, because that means you have two options. You could do the straight C3, which the applicant originally requested, or you could do a PC3 if you feel like that is a more appropriate option. So the first action is the rezoning request, and so you could do a C3 zoning as the applicant has requested. You could also do a planned C3 zoning recommendation as well. If you choose the C3 option, then the second piece, the second action of this application would become unnecessary and moot. If you choose the planned commercial district, then we can move on to the second action, which would be the site plan review. So with that being said, I do have a number of findings on page 14 in which staff would recommend the applicant's request. In this case, the straight C3 zoning appears to be appropriate. And so the Planning Commission could recommend approval of a lesser change from R2 to PC3 in lieu of C3, or they could just go with straight C3, as is consistent with Section 42-43 of the zoning ordinance. Either one of those would be appropriate. The Planning Commission could recommend approval of a zoning change from R2 to C3 or PC3 with the deletion of any C3 uses that the Commission finds to be incompatible with this location. Option number 3, the Planning Commission could recommend that consideration of this application be postponed to allow the applicant or staff to provide additional information prior to consideration of this zoning request. Lastly, the Planning Commission could recommend denial of the application if the appropriate findings of fact cannot be made for a rezoning request. So with that, staff will take any questions that you might have, and we would recommend, since you are capable, because of the future land use category, of recommending a rezoning from R2 to C3 zoning district.
Any questions of staff? Dustin, did we hear from any of the neighbors?
I did not hear from any neighbors. Kai did say that there were a few people that called in, but mainly they just had questions, and it sounds like none of them voiced any opposition or concerns. But I think it was one of those things where everybody assumed that the food bank property was all commercial,
Right.
and it's probably a surprise as to that it wasn't all commercial, and I think that's probably what most of the conversations consisted of.
Thank you. Could we hear from the applicant?
Thank you, Commissioners, for having me. Karen Couch, Executive Director of the Salina Emergency Aid Food Bank. And although I'm tempted to say C3PO every time he says C3, we do obviously have an important stake in the community and providing services. And just to share a little bit of why moving forward with this change in zoning, which would allow us to pursue a project for additional parking, is really important, is because our numbers have increased across the board. With our 7 food programs, we've seen a 67% increase in the number of clients using our weekly grocery program, and that's in the last year. We've also seen the influence of our garden. We have just put a lot of time and effort into making that a community space. So we have over 25 community garden beds, a children's garden program, handicap accessible beds, plus a whole section that we grow produce to come back to the community. So with that garden, we have to have a lot more visitors and volunteers, as well as opportunity for the public to partake in that process. So that brings even more individuals to our facility, our campus. And so we do have a traffic problem around the food bank during certain hours, and the additional parking not only accommodates those using vehicles, but it would also accommodate bike riders and walkers, because right now they have to walk down the middle of the street, and especially when they're getting a grocery cart full of food or getting other services from the food bank, it's hard to do that when there's that much traffic. So we really do believe it will help eliminate some of the incidences and possibilities of damage and harm to folks as they're accessing our vital services. So I do hope you would consider our application, and I'm happy to answer any questions about the food bank or our application.
Karen, thanks a lot for the cover letter, too. That was very informative, and I was kind of shocked at some of those numbers. It was good to know. And I presume that you're okay with going to a straight C3 versus the PC3?
As long as it gets us to the next step. I mean, it makes logical sense whether it's a C3 or whatever that other number was.
Yeah, so we would recommend C3 given the future land use map.
Okay. All right, that seems like it fits well for this
It
project.
makes a lot of sense because, like Mr. Hurst said, we are surrounded by 3 sides with commercial, and it was a shock to me personally. Oh, really? So we want to make sure that we can utilize that facility without having to consider relocating somewhere else in town.
Sure, sure. Any questions of the applicant?
You mentioned bicycle riders.
Yes.
Is there a plan to have specific parking for bicycles?
Yes, in our site plan, we do have a section where if we had continued the parking
Right.
stalls, it would have run into a tree. And so since that is a actual orchard and we don't want to cut down a tree just to pave some parking lot, we decided to go around it and then be able to put a few, I think on this site, it's 5 or 6 parking stalls for bikes. We do have a significant population that comes with bikes, with carts, and right now they have to park by our dumpster or off on St. John's property to try to transport their goods and reload. So this would help increase their safety as well as give them a designated area for loading and unloading.
And I see that on the plan now. Thank
No
you.
problem.
Thank you for pointing that out to me.
Sure.
And I was happy to see that you went with 9-foot width parking stalls instead of 8.5 foot. So
Yes.
my door dings. Appreciate that. Any further questions of the applicant? Okay. Dustin, do we have anybody online?
We do not have anyone online, so anyone from the public who would like to speak on this would be in the room.
Anyone in the audience care to comment on this application?
I would reiterate that if you do choose to recommend C3 zoning, that the site plan and all the elements associated with the site plan would be administrative items that staff would just work with the applicant on and would not be part of the actual rezoning request.
Okay.
So that's something to keep in mind if that's...
Yeah, and I presume the board's okay with having the staff work on that with the applicant? Okay. I'll bring it back to the commission for discussion and possible action. And this would be just on the zoning request
Right.
first.
I move that we approve application Z23-8 from the R2 to the C3 zoning.
Second?
Okay, moved and seconded to approve application Z23-8 with C3 zoning. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? None being heard, motion carries. Congratulations. And we don't need anything on a site plan being...
Yeah, we will not need to do any action on the site plan with it being a recommendation for straight C3 zoning. So what will happen is it'll go before the city commission with your recommendation, and they will review the application and they make a determination on the rezoning request.
Great. Thank you, Dustin. Okay, I guess that brings us to the end of our administrative or legislative items. Dean, administrative items.
We have no administrative items to bring before you this evening, or legislative matters, or preliminary discussion items. So that would bring us to unfinished or other business, and for other business, we would just point out the National Community Planning Month logo on our agenda. The City Commission approved a proclamation making this Community Planning Month in the city of Salina, and we're to celebrate going to let you have October 17th off. There'll be no
With full pay?
with full pay, no commission meeting on the 17th, and so you don't have to see us again till November.
All right. Great. Public forum. Anyone here from the audience care to address this?
We do not have anyone online, so anyone who's interested would be in the room.
Now's your chance. Okay. All right. Well, it seems that we are finished with business. Do I hear a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
In a second? Been moved and seconded to adjourn. All those in favor say aye.
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 We are adjourned. Thank you.